there's a really famous study in happiness science. It was done some years ago by Jerry Clore, a very good psychologist, where he simply called people on the phone and he said, how satisfied are you with your lives? How happy are you? How good is your life? And people gave ratings on a scale of 1 to 7. And the only manipulation is he either called them on a sunny day or a rainy day. And as you might guess, people on a rainy day said their life overall, the totality of their life was worse than people on a sunny day. So if happiness is this really ephemeral thing, it's this really fleeting thing, it's a commodity that we all seek, but it seems to be manipulated by the smallest little perturbations in our environment. So I think we can ask whether the project of pursuing happiness is itself a kind of fool's errand, because it will always be something that can slip away or can be generated in ways that don't involve our best laid schemes, our life plans, but more of these little vicissitudes of the environment that are outside of our control. So maybe we'll come to this question of whether we can find it, whether our efforts to find it are worthwhile. But I thought maybe it'd be useful, given your line of work, to talk about faking it for a little bit. If you all do the following, just to humor me and I think yourselves, try and make a very large smile, like a shit-eating grin. Just smile as largely, as broadly as you can. Doesn't it feel good?
No.
No. That was the question. So there is this research suggesting that there's something called facial feedback. You just look happy, and you feel happy. And there's this old debate about method acting and character acting, and method actors get into the part, and character actors fake it. But if smiling is already enough to make you feel happy, then there's a question about whether faking it puts you in the mood. So I always, when I sit down with an actor, I always want to ask, when you fake it, do you feel it? I want to ask some women this as well.
I'm glad that you found the one possible area where I might have some expertise on this subject, because I'm convinced that I am the least qualified person in the world, if not this room, to be discussing happiness. So I have no idea why Tim invited me, but I've never been a big fan of the method thing. I've never been a big fan of it. And I find that the experience of being on stage is so traumatic in and of itself, in a good way. Like, I enjoy trauma. That any emotional hint that I might need, or capacity for instance, tears or rage or humor, is present in the relationship between me and the audience.
Yeah.
In other words, it's such a stacked and electric experience to have people in the dark looking at you, listening to you, connecting you, and you feel, particularly when you're doing something like Hamlet, that you're endowed with that intellect and all of that stuff from that writer. And if you pick good plays, you do well. But that relationship to me is so exciting and so intense that it gives me everything I need for performance. Like, I don't ever need to think of, my grandfather died and I need to cry now, so I'm going to be myself at 26 years old when my grandfather died. And
the audience makes you cry?
The audience can make you cry, absolutely.
Okay.
The tension of the audience can make you, like nerves. You get nervous before you go in front of an audience?
That's why we're drinking.
Well, that's why you're drinking. I'm a little more accustomed to it because I've been doing it longer. Like, I know the feeling, and I've learned how to reroute the feeling. But in the beginning, it was terrifying to the point where I couldn't control myself. Like, I would shake, and I would feel nauseous, and I can make it happen right now because it was such a distinct feeling to me, the terror of being in front of an audience. But then what I learned is that I could take that, it's basically liquid energy, and I could redirect it. Like, I could redirect it into a comic scene, or I could redirect it into an anger. I could redirect it into a rage. I could,
Can we? I just want to press pause and rewind a little bit to the audience effect, because I think as a psychologist and philosopher working on emotion, one of the things that the field has gone through is a shift from thinking of emotions as things that we possess as individuals, studying these states of a person, to thinking of them as things that are more relational. And that's come out in various ways. One very fascinating study has to do with our old friend, the smile. So you might think you just smile when you're happy. The smile is just this automatic expression of happiness. But a smile is actually a kind of communicative act. So in a very clever study, some psychologists simply looked at films of Olympic athletes who had won gold medals en route to the podium where they were about to collect their prize. So these are people who've worked their whole adult lives to try to achieve this thing that is the pinnacle of athletic success, and they walk out to the podium, and the way these stages are set up in the Olympics is there's a long corridor you need to walk through before you're in the presence of the audience. And all the psychologists did is they analyzed the videotape of people in the corridor and the moment that the crowd appears. And of course, they have to be ecstatic from the first step, right? They've just won the friggin' gold medal. So it's not that they're not happy from the start, but there's no smile there. The smile kicks in when the audience is there. We think it's just this thing that oozes out as soon as you're happy, but actually the smile is an invitation for the people around you to join in this feeling. And I think the idea that emotions are not all in here, but are sort of in here, in the interaction, is something we can all learn from.
Yeah. And then the idea also that, like, that thing about chimpanzees, that the smiling is actually
A threat.
Yeah.
There's wonderful research on laughter. So why do we laugh? Laughter is this very weird thing, and it turns out rats laugh too. You can tickle a rat. You can't hear it. If next time you're in a subway, try this. Just pick up one of those guys and give it a little wiggle. If you use special recording equipment, because they laugh at a very high pitch that's not audible to human beings, but if you slow it down, it has this rhythm that laughter has. Laughter is a very weird sound, and what's so weird about laughter, ha 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 ha. Now say that backwards. Ah ha 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 ha. It sounds the same. It's the only natural occurring sound that sounds the same forward and backwards. So it's a very distinctive kind of acoustic performance. Rats do it when they're tickled. But why do you laugh when you're tickled?
Do rats say ha 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 ha?
In a squeaky, ratty way.
Like? Have you heard it? Do you have sounds?
I can't go that high, but. Any volunteers? Can anyone do rat laughter? So why do you laugh when you're tickled? And the answer is, you're happy. Like my cousins used to hold me down and tickle me. It was a form of torture. But suppose a stranger touched under your armpits, you wouldn't laugh. You would like scream. But when a friend or a lover or a cousin touches you under your armpits, you laugh. And you can think about laughter as a kind of submission cue. It's not merely an expression of joy. It's an expression of the fact that you're with somebody who is safe, but in some sense they've won. They have you pinned down. It's a kind of distress cry that we make in the presence of friends, and that might sound cynical in a way, but it's a nice thought, because that sense of vulnerability, that sense of the kind of vulnerability that's particular to a relationship with friends or with an audience, that isn't threatening in the serious way, is, I think, one very, very special aspect of our psychology.
I'm trying to think about what it is about.
Can we tickle you?
The relation. No. I'm trying to think about what it is about the relationship to the audience, because you just brought that back up, and I thought I think that there's something in it about. Not that I think there's something in it about the idea of being known.
On record.
On record. What do you mean?
Well, being known, communicating to others that you're.
Well, I guess if I follow it through, and it's the idea of being known, and then if I feel like I'm known or understood, then on some level I belong, and that at some level I don't feel alone.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm predisposed to loneliness. But yeah, I know you don't think we're predisposed to much, but I think I'm predisposed to loneliness. Yeah. I think I've always been.
It does work out that one of the most robust cross-cultural correlates of happiness is what some psychologists call attachment, connectedness, some sense of connectedness to others. So if you ask what really brings happiness to life, conversation with a friend, things like that, those moments of connection. So I think those of us who do, maybe through various habits of life, find ourselves feeling alone chronically, it's not surprising that habit of life becomes a source of unhappiness. Just on this audience thing, you have the privileged position of being able to tell us both about film and theater. And with theater, you have an audience there. Film, you have people on the set. But can you say something about what it is to perform, to enact an emotional state when you have an audience there to feel it with you and when you don't?
That's why I'm so crap at film. I'm crap at film, I really am. You know, everything I do in movies is borrowed from things that I've done on stage, and I'm just trying to remember a feeling I had when I was on stage. So hard for me.
Do you prefer stage?
Absolutely.
For that reason?
There's a source. The energy doesn't come from me. The energy comes from the relationship to the audience and the text. The energy, the arc of the play is the idea. The idea is being articulated and exchanged with the crowd. That thrill, that charge, that sense of potential and possibility of discovering something. Also, I like old things, you know, discovering something that have a real continuum to them. New is very exciting. And also just the pure human relationship between the audience. It makes me do things that I don't know how I do.
You've been described as a performer who takes emotional risks. Is that something that you work yourself up to doing, or does it happen spontaneously on stage?
It happens spontaneously.
How do you...
Well, yeah. I mean, you learn how to do it, and then you can manufacture it, but most of the time, all the good stuff happens spontaneously.
So what do you do when the audience isn't giving you the materials you need to go that extra mile?
Then really spontaneous things happen.
Has it become a challenge to yourself? Do you feel like you need to?
Well, you know, the more experience you get as a theater actor, and you know, you're doing 8 shows a week, and you know that they want to see lightning in a bottle every night. It's expensive tickets, and you feel the pressure of that once you get on Broadway. You've been on Broadway for a long time. Then you start to, that creates a tension in you. And any emotion is good. Any emotion is something. And that tension of, oh, fuck them, they're not getting what they want. It becomes this like, don't, and you do something, and then something happens, and it's happening, and it's new, and it's vibrant, and it's an event, and that's a really exciting. I mean, that's the good thing about. I mean, it's the best part of what I do, acting.
I think I'm really captivated by this remark you just made that any emotion is good, because I think from a performance perspective, that's obviously true. Showing a broad emotional palette, bringing any of these to the stage is an achievement that an audience will applaud. But I think the very fact that audiences are happy to go to the theater and be terrified, to be disgusted, to be enraged, and of course to be sad.
In relationship, that's all they want. And that's all I want, is just to be in relationship. And if something real happens, it's on.
Yeah.
If they feel like I'm tense, it's on. If they feel like I'm awkward, it could be bad. But as long as we're in relationship and it's real and it's authentic, everyone's engaged, so I think.
Yeah, well, one of the oldest problems in the philosophy of art is the so-called paradox of tragedy. So Aristotle wondered, why would people, go to a stage to be made miserable by some sad play? Why, So we have this theme of happiness, and I think we all sort of antecedently assume that what we really want in life is happiness. But then you say, well, why would we ever go to a tragedy? So you've done Hamlet, where everybody's sort of just in heaps at the end of the play. Why would anyone want to see heaps of bodies where everything goes terribly wrong for the entire character set in the production? Thoughts about that?
I think it goes back to this thing of not wanting to be alone.
So together in despair. Better to be together in despair than alone in indifference.
Together in whatever. Together in humanity. Together in being. Like it could be despair. It could be Hamlet. It could be watching Gene Kelly dance. That does it to me every time. Mm-hmm. Every time I watch that guy dance, that thing he was doing just now, he's basically doing a side shuffle with his head down, spinning his upper body as he goes. To me, that looks like absolute joy. To me, I also feel like when he dances, there's a phenomenon, and I know it's not true, but I believe I could do it. He's that kind of a dancer. And because he does it out of pure emotion, that's why Singing in the Rain, I think, was such a hit. Here was a guy who said, I'm happy. Yeah. And that emotion that he had when he acted made you feel like, I'm happy too. I can dance like that. You know, with 2 feet, I could jump straight in the air and land on a boop. No, but of course you can't. He's a trained dancer.
Because we're in the Rubin, and you're talking about physicality of emotion. Do you know anything about the rasa tradition in Indian theater? So the basic idea is there are 6 basic emotions in Indian, classic Indian
like
theater.
Bharatanatyam?
Yeah, so you get, in training, you'll get a grid, like on a stage like this, where each square on the grid is labeled for the emotion. And it's kind of like Twister, Indian style. And the idea is you just sort of rotate around, maybe with another performer, and you fall into one of these grids. And depending on the exercise, you might have to vocally express the emotion, you might have to express it in words, spontaneous dialogue, or maybe just with your body. We talk about the mind and the body as if they're these very separate things. Emotions are a clear place where they come together. And performance is something, I love silent cinema. And people say in silent cinema they overact. In silent cinema is like painting, it's like expressionist art. It's not that they're overacting. It's just it's a language of the body where you can convey meaning simply by movement. It's close to dance. René Clair, the great film director, worried that when sound was introduced into cinema, we would lose something. We would lose what was distinctively cinematic because people would just start photographing plays. And in a way that's happened, though I think good directors can give us something that's cinematic still. But I think that we really need to, in thinking about happiness and emotions more generally, we need to attend to the ways in which they're fundamentally about the body.
Mm-hmm. I agree, which is why I was shocked that you feel like we're not predisposed to emotion. I think I'm predisposed. I'm one of those after reading this, or a third of this, that because it's dense stuff, and I went to Yale School of Drama, not anything literate, but I just believe that I came into the world with a particular chemical concoction that plays a big part of who I am.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because here's a disturbing fact. There's something in psychology called set point theory, and the one-liner is basically your level of happiness is genetically determined. So why bother? Some of you are just kind of glum people. Some of you are really chipper people. Has all kinds of impacts on your life. So happy people just do better in life. So if you got the bad formula, you're just kind of screwed. And there's
I didn't say I had the bad formula.
You, plural.
I said I wasn't qualified really to talk about happiness, and I do believe that I came in with a particular predisposition to, yeah, because you talk in the book about how culture and environment play a much larger role in that than maybe we've considered in the past, and I could think, and then it'd be a long conversation, but I could think of reasons why probably, culture and my upbringing and my past and the way I moved around with my mother and father or between my mother and father, could account for my sense of alienation. Forget it.
I think we should go there. I think we're going to drag you into those depths.
Bad track there for a second.
Tell us about parenting.
Do you think there's a difference between something that makes you glad and happiness?
Oh, that sounds like a philosophical distinction.
It is, and you're a philosopher, so I thought I would.
Do you have a distinction in mind?
I do.
Do you think they're different?
But I'm curious what you would say.
Glad to me is something, it's more like a reaction you have to something. You're glad about something,
Right.
You're glad that something happened, where happiness can really be a state of being. And,
That nailed it for me. Yeah.
Okay.
That's how I see it too. You just articulated it better than I would have.
Yeah.
And I guess I know about, and that's how I think about when Tim was saying before about the Western perception of happiness, and that was maybe at some point some pursuit of success. I guess I think about too, for me, that there's this transitive state, and that because I was brought up, my mother's kind of Eastern, and I went to an ashram school, and there's been a lot of Buddhism and Hinduism in my past, and I meditate. So there's this thing in me that I know there's this other state that I'll probably won't reach before I die, but I should try, that is happiness to me. And glad is probably where I exist day to day, and probably why I work. Like I'll go, glad for me is not just, boy, that's good pizza, I'm glad I ate that. or I'm glad to meet you. Glad is actually the fulfillment of working in the theater and feeling known by people and feeling that I belong in human society and that I'm not in isolation and alone. That, I would say, is glad. And then happiness is this state where I don't care whether or not I feel lonely. Whereas that is this thing that I've read about in the Dalai Lama's books that I would like to achieve, was when terribly traumatic things happen to me and overwhelm me and scar me, that I could just say, that I could just pull away from that and go, this pain is in substance exactly the same as this joy. And I could experience them on the same level. I so much wish and hope that in my life at some point I could get to that place.
See, I find that creepy. Okay, so a confession. So first of all, I need to confess that both of us have neurotic Eastern European mothers who have a sort of interest in Eastern philosophy. And the kind of, we were talking outside about how difficult it is for a neurotic Jew to like pretend to be a Buddhist. I'm a neurotic Jew, I'm not going to pretend. I mean, to me, like this, you see this smiling Buddha who's sitting there in a state of resignation.
I'm not pretending, I just want.
I want that state. So
I would want.
Buddhists say get rid of desire because desire leads to suffering and we should have a life free of suffering. Maybe some suffering is okay. Maybe desire is part of the richness of life. Maybe resignation is a kind of indifference, a kind of checking out that prevents you from really rolling with the life's, various punches. And I think
resignation.
Well, there's a way of seeing contentment in a negative light. To be unmoved by the horrors of life is not necessarily a state we should aspire to. And I don't mean this, I don't mean to attribute that philosophy to Buddhism, but I do think that we, in giving up desire and giving up suffering, in trying to achieve happiness in this deep, this profound state of happiness, the smiling Buddha state of happiness, it's arriving at a transcendental state that's so uncharacteristic of the human life that we know, that it's really a choice point where we say, I can imagine somebody whose life is so filled with hardship that becomes an aspiration. But for a life that isn't, it seems to me that it's certainly a big trade-off, a big loss.
So why do you think so many people are drawn to it?
I think everybody hurts a lot. I think life is full of pain. And I think at moments of pain, it looks like a recipe for escape, for comfort.
But what about compassion? I mean, what about if it's not just about solving some internalized pain or some feeling you have yourself, but that some awareness that the point of your existence is to give something.
Let's go back to your audience. So apparently, suppose you had a compassionate Buddhist audience and they see you writhing on stage.
Oh, and they don't react.
Agonizing to be or not to be. And they don't react. They just smile there and say, feeling a certain kind of, I think there's compassion.
But I think you're also characterizing that state as emotionless, which I don't think it is.
Okay, maybe it's not.
I think it's about, for me, or at least what I know about it, from reading and studying and meditating, is not about being emotionless, but being present, about being in the moment, not getting too connected to the moment, or getting lost in the moment, or derailed or distracted by the moment, but in the moment, enjoying the moment, and then letting it pass on and enjoying the next moment. Which isn't to say that you have to be diskompassionate and emotionless in each moment, but that you have a wide range of feelings and that they don't dominate your consciousness.
I guess I think moments are pretty uninteresting, which is like you could define neuroticism as a profound inability to be in the moment because you're constantly worried about the next time step, what's going to happen next. And of course, that's a pathological condition that can make life pretty unpleasant. But
that we both have.
That we both have. But I mean, I also think there's a way in which, if you think about each moment as just this punctate state, not connected to its past or future, not thinking about what's going to happen next or what's going to happen, what's happened before, it ends up being pretty empty. It's pure sensation.
I've had success with it.
So do you meditate?
I do. But I won't give an example through meditation. I'll give an example through theater, through improvisational skills. Viola Spohn's rule number one is say yes to everything. And that
Can I have your checkbook?
things happen in yes. Things happen less frequently with no.
Yeah.
And that's a general rule of thumb for me in performance. And I know that things become fluid and start to become lifelike if I say yes. And saying yes is about not just saying yes, it's about being available. In other words, if I'm available to what's happening, really available to what's happening, in other words, not too wound up in who's that in the fourth seat of the first row. If I'm there, I'm lost. But if I'm in this place where I'm available to everything that's happening, as well as the play, as well as the other actors, that state and that place is really powerful and useful. And I think there is some correlation. I haven't worked it out yet in my own life, but I think that there is some correlation to existence in that.
I like that. Let me ask you about a kind of saying yes that relates to your life, which is the thought about saying yes to me connects up with the idea of relinquishing control. No is a way to try and hold the reins. And when you say yes to decisions you didn't necessarily initiate, that's a way of giving up control. Parenthood. So lots of studies have looked at the effects of parenthood on well-being, and the results are complex and sometimes conflicting. But putting the science to one side, I've never heard a parent say that it didn't change their life in a lot of ways for the worse, making things a lot harder, introducing demands that didn't exist before. But I've also never heard a parent say they regretted it. And many parents say this is the greatest source of joy in their life. So having fed you a line, you want to tell us a little bit about the place of parenting and your happiness?
I think it connects to this pseudo-Buddhist thing I have. I think, I'm sorry, I'm gonna be careful how I talk about this. I think that I thought for a very long time that my life was about me. And that was a certain headspace I was in for a long time. And then something came along that I loved more than me. And that was a very powerful feeling. That my existence didn't matter was an important feeling for me. That someone else's existence was more important than mine was a huge relief.
Yeah. There are studies of East and West in happiness, what makes life good. And I think in the West, when polled, a lot of people talk about pleasure. They say, what makes my life go well is when people talk about hedonic theories of well-being or happiness. A hedonic theory is a theory that says happiness is measured in pleasure. You can think about hedons as these little units that you sort of add up. And I've got a lot of hedons today, did a lot of pleasurable things today. And when you look cross-culturally, counting the hedons doesn't look that important in other places. And in societies that are very individualistic, that focus on individual aspirations and success, hedons are more important. You go to more collectivist societies where interpersonal relationships, working for the service of a greater good, of a social good, those things become important. And in fact, there are some studies suggesting that in certain Far Eastern samples, when asked about pleasure, it's rated as a negative. It reduces well-being. If you're feeling too much pleasure, you're doing something wrong. And that might be sort of overstating the case. But I do think that parenting and other social relationships are points in life where we achieve an aspect of happiness that's no longer about counting the hedons. It's really about finding fulfillment in the flourishing of another. And that's a very, very special thing to achieve.
Yeah, right. And that said beautifully. Finding fulfillment in the pleasure of others is a big part of it, and also knowing that you're needed, and you feel like you belong, and you're loved, and you have the capacity for love, which, you know, for a while there I wasn't sure. You know.
Do you think it's changed the way you think about performance? That is a way to think about acting as it's just making me larger.
Here's the bad part.
Uh-oh.
I'm a lot less interested in performing since they came.
Yeah.
It's a drag. I'm a lot less interested in acting. It's a real drag. That's why I've been doing a lot of film. No, my head, right, it was like, oh yeah, private school. Okay, I'll go do movies. And it's been a drag. It's been like, what am I doing? And I go, I'm not having any fun anymore. I got kids now. It's not for me to have fun anymore. It's like, but I realized that my joy really is in doing plays. My joy really is. But the other thing is that I hate doing plays. Greg is here, the director of View from the Bridge. He'll tell you, you know, after I want to open the show, and then I want to run for a week, and I'm done. I'm exhausted. I don't want to do that stupid play again. Are you crazy? You know the shit I have to come up with to make that interesting every night? Are you out of your mind? You have to do that for 4 months, 8 times a week, during the day, when they bring entire yeshivas to watch you? No, it's just, no, forget it.
This is a guy who spent weeks doing plays with Scarlett Johansson, so we're really feeling
that was the one with
a lot of
Scarlett
pity for you. So,
so yeah, it definitely. I definitely stopped being interested in acting, but you know, coming to here, this is the thing. Coming here tonight and thinking about, and also, you know, thinking about, well, I got to get back to that. I got to find my joy again, find my glad. It may not be my happiness, but it's my glad. I got to find my glad, and, you know, trying to find things to work on that give me that feeling of being connected and excited and, you know, engaged, which I imagine at some level for you is teaching and science.
Yeah, teaching is performance and has that aspect of connection. It's also, I mean, one reason I asked about how acting is affected is there's a way of thinking of teaching as a kind of, it's not quite a parental relationship, but it's a giving relationship. In fact, it's a very reciprocal one, because every teacher knows you learn more than you teach. It's just a numbers game. You've got more students in a classroom, so you have more people to learn from than they just have you. And I think maybe there's a way of thinking about performance as interactive in a way where both you're giving something and getting something back.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I think also, yeah, there's in the other book, The Conscious Brain, I have this, I might as well use this because I've got it, I thought about it, is this Gazzaniga guy, is that did I say his name right?
Gazzaniga, yeah.
This is this thing, I love this. I read I thought I was reading Jesse's most recent book, but I read some old book he wrote, which I really liked very much. It's called The Conscious Brain, if you're interested. But this thing he said, because it's about understanding consciousness, and it relates to what we're saying, and I'll title it together after I read this quote from it. But he says, one interesting feature of Gazzaniga's account is that he doesn't tell us how consciousness arises, but rather what consciousness is for. He emphasizes the importance of taking an evolutionary stance towards the mind, and this implies that consciousness evolved to make sense of what we do. Put differently, consciousness serves a narrative function. Its fundamental role is to weave a story that renders us intelligible to ourselves. And I thought, that's me. Like every other magazine.
That's interesting.
Read that book. But the idea that what I'm doing with these plays and with these characters and with these relationships to these audiences is that I'm experimenting and trying on different narratives to see not only what they tell the audience about themselves, but obviously, more importantly to me, in how they respond, what it tells me about me.
2 days ago, I was giving a tribute talk to a friend who died last year, a philosopher named Peter Golding, and he published a book posthumously that's just about to appear. So I was talking about the book. And the book is about narrative, and it's about the idea that not only do we have narrative in fiction and theater, but in our lives, we narrate our own lives and the importance of that. And as a reader of this book, I found myself sort of asking, do I narrate my own life? And there's a wonderful line in the first Wim Wenders film where one of the lead characters says, "Life is not storied. Stories exist only in fiction. There's no plot. There's no beginning, middle, and end. There's no story arc such that here you are, this hero facing a challenge, trying to achieve a goal, overcoming obstacles, arriving at your goal. Those things we can identify kind of after the fact. But as we go through life, we're so caught up in the moment and the challenges of every day that I think this storytelling practice that we engage in theater and in fiction is somehow alien to life. And I think that this idea that we need to step back and narrate and make sense of it all is an interesting one, because while it might be something that's good for us to do, I think a lot of us, speaking autobiographically, don't do it that often. Philosophers are supposed to be reflective. Know thyself, says Socrates. But I think...
well, I think it sounds like you do it through film, though. It sounds like you're a real cinephile. It sounds like
I think art does it for us.
Yeah.
So rather than stepping back and trying to find the thread, the narrative thread that runs through our own lives, I think we're constantly consulting these imagined lives, these presented lives, and they impart a kind of meaning that helps us maybe see something with which we identify, something that we can learn from. So the role of theater on that view is not to reflect life. It's not a mirror of life, because life lacks these plots. But it still can give meaning to life.
Mm. Yeah. What the great thing about theater for me is because you know that it's a setup. In other words, the great thing is that you know I'm not the guy, and you know that this is a play that was written in the 18th century. And so you abandon that effort of trying to pretend this is real, and the ideas, the concepts, really matter more. Whereas in a film, I feel like it's much more immersive, and I like that as well. There's something about...
You lose yourself in the film.
You lose yourself in the film, you fall in love with the person you're supposed to fall in love with, you feel the feelings of the character. But there's something I like, this Brechtian idea, like for Fremston, the alienation, that you're not... You know it's a play. When you go to a play, you always know it's a play. So part of what that does is that it allows you intellectually and emotionally to connect with the idea. Lloyd Richards, a great teacher I had, used to say that your main function as an actor is to be the voice of the playwright. You're speaking the idea of the play. And that, so in a sense, it's very real, but it's conceptual. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I actually, with your film, I mean, we want to bring the audience into this, but with the film that you directed, Everything is Illuminated, which is a wonderful film that I would recommend to everyone here who hasn't seen it. I felt that you actually did something very successful by not letting the characters be relatable in that way of immersion that you're talking about. They're almost like masks in a Greek theater. In fact, they even express themselves with fairly fixed, fairly rigid facial forms. And it's not that they're archetypes because they're dimensional as characters, but there's something there that's unreal. But it's an extremely real story. So this is a story about memory, about a young man who's tracing the history of his family, a grandfather who survived German occupation of Ukraine and was saved by a Ukrainian woman. So it's a very personal story about a hardship in the past. But it's at that level of those themes, the hardships of the past. All of us have history, and that we could relate to this search, this inquiry into into how we got here, and the various hardships of our ancestors, the gratitude we have to those. It's so contingent that any of us are alive today, and all of the various accidents that led to that should give us pause. And sometimes it's valuable to step back and feel that gratitude. It's a film about that. So I think you've delivered something very conceptual that's still very visceral, but not through this process where we lose ourselves in the characters. The characters are masks.
Did feel a little like it was some things were an exercise in commedia for sure.
Yeah. So if you just think about the sort of history of pre-literacy, how do you convey cultural knowledge? And cultural knowledge is just collective memory. It's this stuff that makes us us. And to do that, you need some sort of form of delivering it to the next generation. Rhyme. I mean, the arts are how we do this. Pictures, music, poems, and storytelling is one of those ways. And I think when we think about our own lives, there are some people who do think about their lives as stories. I lived in the American South, and American Southerners are great storytellers. So they could talk about the trip over to the Rubin tonight in a way that would get any producer at the edge of her seat wanting to throw money at the project and say, let's put this on the big screen. For me, it was just a walk to the theater, and so I do think that the ways in which narrative get used are not necessarily capturing something that's deep in us in terms of how we understand our own lives. I think it's a very different, it's a very, I think, interestingly unhuman way of thinking about a life. And the fact that we all come to narrative so readily and enjoy narrative so much is a puzzle that I don't think I know a good answer to.
I wonder why you cry. Or have you ever cried at a movie or a...
So the movies, of course there's non-narrative film, the episodes. Sometimes you need a story to get to see why this moment is so poignant.
Have you ever cried at a movie or a play, like really, and felt something powerful at a...
Yeah, but
from a film
the
or a
movie
play?
that made me cry most was Au hasard de Balthazar by Bresson, which is not really narrative. It's about a donkey that gets beaten up a lot.
There you go. There you go. And now, but isn't there something in that resonates with you?
Yeah,
Right.
But so I think there's stories, and then there are these moments of resonance, and the moments of resonance don't need plot.
But there wouldn't be moments of resonance if there weren't stories.
They're experiences. So maybe this is a philosophical hair-splitting moment, but I think that there's one thing that can work with fiction is you get this moment that you connect to, and all that trapping around it, like what happened before and what the characters are interested in trying to achieve, that might not connect to your life.
Right, absolutely.
But there's that one moment where you're feeling something that they're projecting on the screen, and you say, I know what that's like.
I guarantee you every great artist is after that.
Yeah.
And all the other stuff, you're right, is trappings. It's just to lure you in. That's why we turn the lights down. Just lure you in, get you in the mood.
Yeah.
You believe this now, right? I'm in a relationship with that one. You buy that? Good. But that's not the important part.
Your face...
Here comes the important part.
Yeah.
The important part is you. That's the important
You're
part.
the audience.
Bingo. It's always about them.
There's this, I don't know if you all know Bill Viola, who's a video artist, but he did this wonderful thing where he simply showed people making emotional expressions and slowed it down. And it's gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
We don't know why they're so sad. They're crying, they're weeping. And you can't help but feel torn apart by seeing these faces in slow torment. And I think, in a way, that's all I'm saying. It's not to get away from narrative fictions, from film, from theater, and their fundamental importance. It's to relocate their importance in those moments of emotional resonance, just what we started the conversation with.
Yeah. Success is not the goal. I know it's a cliche, but it's really the truth, man. It's the truth. If you want to be a great artist, I don't know what even being a great artist is.
Surviving.
I think surviving is the goal, absolutely. Feeding yourself is the goal. But in terms of what really gives me joy, or gives me my glad, or points me in the direction of my happiness, is things that feel truthful, and things where like this thing I read from Jesse's book about consciousness is about attaining some kind of self-narrative. Like, what am I here for? What's the point? I now know something truthful about myself. This makes me emotional. That feels really good, because I feel like a human being. And it means I care about people. And that, for me, that's theater. That's my gig, Some people it's painting, some people it's writing, some people, and so I believe that it is a horrible thing if that's It is a horrible thing because it's so difficult that it's an industry, that what we do. And I can make a lot more money doing movies. And I do, as I think about escalating my career, I'm doing more and more movies and less interested in what I do, and I could give a shit now. I really could. I mean, I hate that here we are talking about happiness.
Yeah.
And I feel like I feel like a little bit, occasionally I get that feeling of what the hell am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm existing and I'm feeding my children, and I'm back to that place where I'm not the most important person at the center of the universe. You know what I mean? And that's how I deal with that. And I don't know how to deal with it. And I have great compassion for people who want to do something but can't feed themselves unless they do something else. It's a really hard one. It's a really hard one. But I know there are enough of those people out there that they can do it together. And that's certainly how I started. And I kind of wish I was there again.
I saw Abbas Kiarostami, the Persian director, give an interview at Lincoln Center a couple weeks ago. Some of you might have been there. And one of the questions from the audience was, what's your advice to an aspiring filmmaker? And he said, in Farsi, stop. Don't do it. It's horrible. It's a horrible field. Chances are you won't make it. Don't do it. And I don't think he was just being obnoxious. I think that's the right response, because what that response does is it serves as a filter. Because some people will say, I know you're right, but I can't do otherwise. I can't stop. This is who I am fundamentally. And it's for those people, if it's such a need for you, then even if you're not succeeding or getting there, then it's still you in pursuit of what makes you you, and that alone has value. Positive psychology, the study of happiness, will say, look, people can be just as happy doing anything as long as they're feeding themselves. So wealth doesn't have a big impact on happiness, and job change doesn't have a big impact on happiness. So people might think, oh, the only thing I could do is be an actor or be a philosopher. But as Liev has told us in the shift to parenting, these moments of discovery in life where you say, well, I could have been happier, and I can be happy doing this other stuff. But I think there should be comfort in that, because if we're fighting for something that we're just not going to achieve, we should always know that there's a safety net there, which is happiness can be found doing something else. But if you find yourself with that knowledge and still engaged in the struggle, that means there's a value to that struggle that's so deep and so important that it might outweigh happiness.
On a side note, I was a lot more consistently glad when I was a Mason's assistant.
Yeah.
I was so happy when at 4 o'clock when work was over. It's great. I was so glad. We'd go have a meal, and I'd be so glad to have a meal. Anyway,
Yeah.
No.
There's this hideous institution in academia called tenure. So once you have tenure, you have job security, so you basically stop doing everything as long as you don't break any laws. But people who get tenure continue to work, and there's something deeply irrational about that. Like, why do you continue to do research? Why do you continue to teach? And the answer is it's like this compulsion. It's a need. Wittgenstein said that in order to philosophize, you need to transcend into primordial chaos and feel at home there. And I think all of us who have a passion in life know that part of the passion is pain. And I think we don't do it because we think it will bring us happiness in the glad sense. I think we do it because it's somehow, it's our way of confirming that we're alive.